In March 2025, the alleged patron saint of cocaine, Conor McGregor, declared his intentions to run for the President of Ireland. Fresh from his civil suit loss for sexual assault, this greenwashed demon joined an American support group for rich men who were too notorious for cheating on Bumble now. If you don't know, Conor McGregor is an MMA fighter and business owner who, in my opinion, looks like one of Joe Rogan's nipples escaped after wishing on a star to be a real boy. Now this amoral prodigal son of Ireland is in the White House as he walks the rocky road to hell, if only to show that it's not always paved with good intentions. But sommelier of scoundrels Donald Trump did, as the psychic tumor on the butthole of whatever eldritch horde spends its free time shitting into our collective mind, would decide to invite Conor for a reason. And Conor said yes. You see, it's two proud traditions. The first is the cynical, weaponized Irishness they call Patty's Day in the States. And the second, however, is an older one. It's one that they've inherited from the British, when they need the help of men like Conor to perform. You see, Conor McGregor can't be our president, but he can be our Governor General. Don't worry if that's a little cryptic, we'll get there, trust. You know, it used to be shocking to say God was dead, at least when Nietzsche said it. As a child in 90s Ireland, it felt conflicted. No one cared as 8-year-old me in my Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle pajamas made such a statement. Ireland seemed to have moved on from religion, but without any reckoning, we sort of just stopped being the country that locked women up in slavery for having sex. We were modernizing. Yet in most media, to be Irish was to be Catholic still. The 90s was cursed with this disregard for all things, a millennial kickflips and jackass culture built for South Parkification and Deadpool memes. Atheism was part of the general backdrop and counterculture. However, in Ireland it felt different. It wasn't grappling with maturing against the imposed values of mom and dad. No, I was wrestling with attention alive and well when I look at Conor McGregor. What does it mean to be Irish? See, I was an Irish Republican, raised in a Sinn Féin household, and I was a Catholic as a child. The Brits, they're Protestant. That was the simple narrative taught in history classes, which was demonstrably false and pedagogically classist. Yet in the 90s, my country had been free for 70 years or so. The exact date is complicated and I use the word free loosely. We'll get to why. But I grew up in the Republic of Ireland, the state created after the Civil War and the War for Independence, one of two states on the island of Ireland. The other is Northern Ireland, which occupies much of Ulster in the north of Ireland.
It's hard to explain the sense of bewilderment one feels on seeing the open sore of Belfast for the first time.
Now, if you've tried to learn about Ireland, you might have heard of the Troubles and the Famine, but there is over 100 years between those events, and in my opinion, it's a terrible idea to skip the creation of both the illegitimate state of Northern Ireland and the free state of Ireland in the south. Now, we won't be complete, but we'll cover it well enough for the topic here, because understanding that duality of Ireland's past heroes is crucial to making sense of the constipated soul of Conor McGregor. So, we start not in 1970s Northern Ireland, but in 1847's Ireland. O'Connell, the man they called the Liberator, is dead. There's no heir to his political legacy. A rival from the Young Ireland movement, Gavin Duffy, said this is the price men like O'Connell pay for preferring lackeys to peers. As O'Connell dies, Ireland is going through what will become known as the Famine. However,
okay, I want to talk about Ireland. Specifically, I want to talk about the famine. There was no famine.
During that time, the British occupied Ireland, and the people were split into landlords and peasants. Now, O'Connell, the so-called Liberator, was a landlord, and given we were on for a century before the Troubles and 70 years before the Civil War and going through a murder of over 1 million Irish, you might ask, wait, why is this guy called a Liberator? Sounds like Ireland is not very liberated yet. That's a good question. The answer is this is part of a limited concept of liberation. See, O'Connell liberated his class of wealthy Catholics. Most of the landlord class were of the Protestant ascendancy, the ruling class of Anglo-Irish planters. Now, O'Connell was privileged, but as a Catholic, he was subject to penal laws. Usual things one would expect here. Can't marry Protestants, not allowed to hold certain public offices, restricted from certain places like certain colleges, and a ban on buying land or inheriting it from Protestants. O'Connell wanted the emancipation of Catholics. However, as a wealthy man in the UK, he was less concerned with working class issues. He also said that Republicans like Robert Emmet should be hanged and expressed disinterest in preserving the Irish language, because he didn't want to be in a free Ireland, but instead powerful in the UK as a Catholic. In fact, he wanted the Irish to become a West Britain. Now, this limited freedom would be detrimental, as the material conditions, as in the access to land, tools, food and shelter, were core to the famine. Question: what do you call a famine where there's enough food for everybody?
No famine.
This is the case in Ireland. You see, the Irish were basically subsistence farmers. They were given land to work for a lord, and in return were given a smaller plot to work for enough food to feed themselves. Eventually, the Irish got the potatoes, the famous catalyst blamed for all of this. Then, as times changed, they ended up having to grow only one strain of potato. Not a particularly tasty strain, but one that was calorically dense. This was directly because of choices made by the landlord class. In fact, these conditions were so bad that Swift of Gulliver's Travel fame wrote a modest proposal mocking the treatment a century prior. However, despite the dangers of a monoculture and the suffering of the Irish, nothing was done to avoid the inevitable. Between 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 people in Ireland died. Over 1 million by conservative estimates. Another 1 million emigrated, displaced to the UK and the US as much of the modern diaspora that figures like Trump hope to connect to via McGregor. When the blight hits, it spreads like fire without the diverse crops to slow it down. This has happened to other crops like the banana, and it'll happen again. It's why monocultures of food are to be avoided. There's just a natural resistance in diversity, because if something is built to perfectly attack something, you don't want everything having the same weakness. You want some mix. The potatoes turn to mush, but the rest of the food is still good and still exported to England for sale. The food of the stolen land moved away from the people of Ireland as they die by the class O'Connell is loyal to. Following O'Connell's death, though, his movement of anti-republican, Catholic-centric liberal reform goes into stasis. The Young Irelanders and other radicals rise in his wake. Men like Parnell, growing up in this time, galvanise around class issues. Soon, the Irish are focused on tenants' rights, rent strikes, and in general opposition to the ruling class. This solidarity on working class issues unites Catholics and Protestants and was led by Parnell, an Anglo-Irish Protestant of wealth himself. However, following an affair, there was a split. The movement became Parnellites and anti-Parnellites, with the anti-Parnellites backed by the church. Parnell managed to get a great amount of work done, but himself and his successor Redmond, the leader of the Parnellites, were anti-violence, still committed to peaceful means. Despite the Parnellites being the minority, Redmond leads the Irish Parliamentary Party after the split, when the anti- and pro-Parnell forces merge further on. With the tensions lowered, the party set about working for Home Rule, aka the Irish decide what happens in Ireland, still in the UK, but just their own government. It passes, but then World War I breaks out. Things change. The Irish stage a rising. Heroes like Pearse and Connolly, the man who called O'Connell's time a chapter of horrors, died fighting the British for freedom. The Easter Rising of 1916 upsets Redmond. It's not his vision of a peaceful transition. He awaits the reveal of his home rule. But there's a catch. The North will have to join later. It eventually is revealed that the Protestants in the North, who had been militarizing, were made promises that they would never be in Ireland with the Catholic majority. So Redmond loses to more radical voices, Sinn Féin and Arthur Griffin. It only takes a month before Ireland is at war with England. We'll be skipping the War for Independence because this is about McGregor, but Griffith and this tension that Redmond managed in the post-Parnell is important. See, the war ends with an offer to Collins and Griffith, a price they'd have to pay to avoid further war. Michael Collins is one of Ireland's most celebrated figures. Liam Neeson plays him in the movie. However, it's complicated. In the treaty, they get the Free State in the south, but they have to swear to the king and give up Northern Ireland. Collins signs it and says he signed his death warrant. Civil war breaks out, and both signatories are dead soon after, Griffith and Collins. A classist tension between the Irish, masked by Catholicism as a shared struggle and culture, was now boiling over. The Irish were politically, culturally, religiously, and literally partitioned by the border in the north. It was a scar on the island, but finally we have the two states you see in the Troubles. And in the new Northern Ireland, the Irish minority communities are abandoned to Protestant rule, where the Unionists have been militarising for decades. So while the Provisional IRA isn't a thing yet, their British counterpart is, and the Free State, seeking good relations with the British, turns a blind eye to all of it. The Civil War results in Republicans who wanted a united Ireland and refused to abandon their people in the north, aligning with the trade unions, socialists and feminists to fight for a better Ireland. One that didn't abandon anyone. And sadly, this dream lost. Men like Liam Mellows, who dreamt of it, would be executed without trial by their countrymen. And in the coming years, many women and children would be victimised by the new state. Those who fought back against unionist gangs and terror would be hunted by the UK and Ireland alike. The state aligned blue shirt fascists like Owen O'Duffy with the landlords and business interests. Many Irish were sacrificed to preserve their class position. At time of writing, a mass graven tomb still lingers with hundreds of babies in it, waiting to be investigated. It was discovered decades ago. But the state wasn't ready for such a truth. My own family were brutalised by the laundries. A laundry is a home for women where they do forced labour for the church to work off of sin. Many of these women were there for being survivors of assault, often placed there by their abuser and denied release, unless their abuser was to accept them back. The women would be beaten, would have their heads shaved. They'd be denied the right to speak, and in some cases, be forced to eat off of the floor. They were even stripped of their names. The romantic vision of Ireland wilts under such realizations, and all the while the American Irish were there to defend such things. While my state let the national broadcaster publish anonymous nuns speaking ill of the victims of their abuse, the Americans had their own methods. The Catholic League spoke of these women as a social problem and defended the church. This system began with Protestants under British rule, but from 1922 it continued by Catholics under Irish rule till the last laundry closed in 1996, all the while defended by the Irish state and many Irish Americans. The state apologised after in 2014, but they wrongly said the laundries weren't profitable. A report from UCD in 2024 showed this wasn't the case. One historical consultant, Francis Finnegan, said, "Possibly the advent of the washing machine has been as instrumental in closing these laundries as have changing attitudes." The state also directly benefited, as much of this forced labour washed materials for the army and the President of Ireland. That's the seat McGregor fancies for himself. It was an office created in 1937, and you see, from 1922 to 37, Ireland was led by a Governor General, appointed by the Monarch of England, an Irish face for British politics. Ireland thought it was free, but the Governor General, a post-colonial artifact, was there to keep an eye on things. The realisation of O'Connell's West and Britain. The office was dissolved, but there is a question lingering. Frank Ryan, a decorated man who fought fascists in Spain, Italy and Germany, wrote once, "The aim of the conquerors, frankly admitted by themselves, is to render the Irish people impotent in Ireland by subjugating 9/10 of the native stock to the rule of 1/10 who were planters. It so happened that Ireland was Catholic and that the conquerors were Protestants. The difference in religion was but an incident. Had Ireland been a Protestant country, penal laws would have been enforced. Or had the conquerors been Catholics, there still would have been penal laws. But the penal laws were not framed for the advancement of one religion, nor the suppression of another. They were not anti-religious, but anti-Irish. Micheál Mac Donnchadh an Phoblacht continues the thought to say, by 1829 it was long past time when the British government could safely repeal remaining penal laws and grant Catholic emancipation without in any way threatening the Union or the landlords. In fact, the emancipation legislation, while opening new career paths to wealthy Catholics, actually disenfranchised the 40-shilling freeholders, taking the vote from the very tenant farmers who had backed O'Connell's campaign. This, said Ryan, placed our destinies in the hands of the landlords. So that question, was the damage done? As in, did the Irish finally have their state, so long as it was English in design, so long as they could mould it, so long as fascists like O'Duffy could develop its police? As James Connolly said before giving his life for this country, if you remove the English army tomorrow and hoist a green flag over Dublin Castle, unless you set about the organisation of the Socialist Republic, your efforts will be in vain. England will still rule you. She will rule you through her capitalists, through her landlords, through her financiers, through the whole array of commercial and individualistic institutions she has planted in this country and watered with the tears of our mothers and the blood of our martyrs. The lesson that many like Redmond had to learn was that power given instead of taken always comes with a price. A devil's bargain you pay over and over. Let's talk about Sinners. Coogler's Sinners is a film mostly about black people, by black people, and of their culture, so I won't be touching 90% of it. But you should check it out, I enjoyed it. Now we'll be focusing on Remmick, who, spoilers, is a vampire. We'll also be talking about what that symbolizes to me, since on the surface, he is Irish, and literally performing my culture. And of course, we'll be talking about what this means for Conor. The film introduces Remmick being chased by the Choctaw, friends of the Irish, as they warn the family he's not what he seems. Remmick isn't human but a vampire, that's the surface read, but it's not too deep to figure out that they mean he isn't Irish. See, during the genocide called the Famine, the Choctaw sent aid to Ireland. The Irish sent figures later on like Eamon de Valera to meet with the tribe. There's a solidarity there. The Irish also fought with the Catalonians, the Mexicans, and more. We were colonized and we stand with the oppressed. Except some didn't. Today, many of us stand with Palestine against the genocide by Israel. Except some don't. We had men like O'Connell who opposed slavery, but we had others who left Ireland for America and defended it. We had Irish West Brits who acclimated to being British, and we had plastic paddies who assimilate into American white supremacy. Remmick is tricky though. See, he's a predator and he wants to feed off of black culture, but he's also not racist overtly. He hates the KKK and wants to give black people the power to survive them. Sees himself as the good guy. He still sees himself as oppressed and post-colonized. You see, Remmick embodies the price. At least for me. A terrible price you have to pay for the power gifted. Vampires have long been an analogy for capitalism and the idea of losing one's humanity for eternal life. Remmick offers to preserve and carry on the culture and memories and stories, like he carries his own. But while Remmick is from Ireland and he sings Irish songs, remember, he is not Irish. He traded that for the power. This is mirrored with Annie, who in the film knows her own people's culture and chooses to die rather than let her knowledge become commodified and owned by this entity, as if it is better off losing it and letting it die human than letting it become undead. Back in the island of Ireland for a second. As Irish were tortured and killed in the north by the state by extra-legal gangs or paramilitaries that the state refused to combat, the Republic in the south was more concerned with ingratiating itself to capitalism, to the new empire of the US of A. By the time I was a kid in the 90s, the class struggle and anti-imperialism was background for most of the coverage. As I struggled with my atheism and what it meant for me to be Irish, it became clear to me we suppressed class issues and everything that exposed the mistakes of the Free State. We focused on what was palatable to the landlords. Religion. When I went on school trips to the north, we looked at people in segregated communities with wealth divides and were told with a straight face, this is about religion. The peace walls go up into the sky and are covered in political messaging. But we're told, no. So one side of town is Catholic and the other side is Protestant. We played a part along with the UK and the US in making this about issues that had two sides, instead of issues with an oppressor in the wrong and a people yearning to be free. You might have seen this tactic elsewhere in the world, like in Palestine, where the US, who McGregor bent the knee to, are aiding Israel in committing a genocide. I had to figure it out for myself. I'm Irish, but Irish isn't being Catholic. It isn't anything another person decides except being connected to this history and this island. You can't sanitize it for the tastes of the colonizers, lest they be offended. If we allow Irishness to become vague words we don't control, then propagandists can shift those definitions. Slowly but surely, you perform Irishness with American or British politics. A puppet. McGregor went to the US to interview for the job.
Wait, are we taking questions?
Taking over the podium.
Ireland and America, we are siblings. We consider America our big sibling. So it's important for Ireland to have be a peaceful, happy, prosperous country for the 40 million Irish Americans to have a place to visit.
He didn't announce to Ireland he wanted to serve us. He told America, the new empire, what kind of job he would do here. Conor can never be our president, but he can be the new face of colonialism on this fucking island. An American Governor General for the MAGA era. The new way to erase Irish culture, identity and politics is through the US. Owing to the tragic genocide of our people that they call the Famine, there is more Irish in the US than in Ireland. This means that the Irish Americans can speak over the Irish. Now, I don't value the diaspora, but I do worry what happens if they don't respect Irish culture and history. What happens if they sell out, like Remmick, and perform Irishness, while what they really do is white supremacy or American culture with a green tint to it? It is crucial for the American Irish to connect with being colonized, genocided, and the underdogs. It is crucial to align with people in Ireland and other oppressed places. Otherwise, you risk losing what remains of us, bit by bit, paying the price for assimilation into the US, becoming plastic patties. So what is happening? Identity can be turned into labels we use to define ourselves. Irishness can be Catholic, it can be patriotic, it can be Republican. However, it never is as simple to boil down to a single word. This isn't just about Irishness. Words like man, conservative, or any other umbrella term contain, by definition, all the words under the umbrella. Some overly reductive figures seek to flatten identity down to words to suit them, but functionally omit other words under the same umbrella. Now, words mean things, and some gatekeeping is natural to a degree, but this isn't natural. This is an effort to control Irishness to make it suitable for American culture. When it was the Brits, we called it colonialism, even if they found an Irishman willing to sell it. Now it's the Americans making our culture serve their interest. And Conor is here, asking for the invite. Asking, do we want to pay the price and join him among the power at the cost of our culture and ourselves? Returning to me and my anxiety with atheism and Irishness, I decided I have to define words via my relationship to them and not define myself by the way other people use them. In the movie Sinners, Remmick speaks languages he didn't know. He quotes intimate details of sex he's never had. He owns the cultures he consumes. His victims lose their narratives, their myths, and the selves to him. Whiteness in the US famously has shifted to include Irish, Italians, and Jewish people. People in other places denied whiteness. This malleable idea of race is why it's called a social construct. There is no fixed idea of what whiteness is, only what it isn't at any one moment. The tension I felt in shedding my religion and it making me less Irish was a control mechanism. I felt myself tugged back from expressing my own identity as an Irish person in order to conform to the external expectation of Irishness. Similarly, white people, men, Americans, all these words have invisible control mechanisms because of how we are told we're supposed to be. Boys don't cry type shit. Narratives installed in how we conceptualize ourselves. These seek to homogenize the culture, producing unity and conformity. But as we seen with the monocultures of the Irish genocide, such is ripe for blight. The right wing has been weaponizing a term, mind virus, but it's one I think has some play here. Just not how they use it. Imagine a thought, seductive in nature and empowering or fear-inducing in affect, but ultimately untrue and harmful. One not rooted in any reason, but one rooted in hijacking those narratives that control how we construct our identity. Such would spread like a wildfire across a culture. A blight on the monoculture of white supremacy or cultural hegemony, manifesting as pogroms, mass hysteria, or fascism. Healthy discussion would slow that down, prevent disaster. But the narratives pre-filter such options. McGregor isn't Irish in his intents. He's not here to protect our women. Ireland isn't full. These are all attempts at inserting such a blight. But so far, Ireland has not been fertile to such thought. However, the Empire in America wants Ireland brought to heel. We are their tax haven. Our government is very friendly to them, and their presidents court our approval because the Irish Americans are a large voter base. They fear our power, but salivate at our vulnerability. McGregor doesn't want to help you, but to consume you, to give your identity to Trump as another tongue the American war machine can speak. The West Brits are called as such for being more British culturally than Irish. The plastic paddies are considered detached and fake for not being connected to the island. Who are we if we lose what remains of our culture here? I'm not religious, I'm an atheist, but here's a Bible quote for those who need it. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world and yet forfeit their soul?